Between 1847 and 1863, on a sprawling Virginia estate where the fog clings to the ground like memory refusing to die, something took place that no county clerk dared to record. Those who stumbled upon the evidence, medical ledgers, blood-stained linens, and the ciphered journals of a physician who called himself a man of progress, chose silence over sanity. For within the locked eastern wing of Covington Manor lived a woman whose very existence blurred the boundaries of creation itself, a bearded slave woman named Jordan, sold for less than a horse, yet capable of fathering children. When Union officers forced open that forgotten wing 16 years later, they found chains embedded deep in oak, surgical tools rusted by time, and a cot still marked by two impressions, one small, one enormous. But what froze them were the sketches tacked to the wall, faces of three young women, all resembling one another, all labeled subjects of hereditary inquiry. Beneath them, the word success written in a trembling hand. The journals would later reveal what polite society could never stomach: that Dr. Edmund Covington, physician, scholar, and father of three, had transformed his home into a temple of desecrated science. His three daughters were not merely witnesses to his experiments. They were the instruments, and Jordan, the woman he called the specimen, was both victim and vehicle. You will hear things tonight that history tried to bury, but truth, like a restless ghost, finds its way through the floorboards. What happened in that house did not end there. It echoed into generations, reshaping bloodlines and belief itself. Before we descend into what was done beneath those painted ceilings, make sure you are anchored to something real. Subscribe to this channel, Liturgy of Fear, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Let the map of truth seekers grow. And now, whisper this twice below to seal what you are about to learn within you. I will not look away. Say it again louder inside your mind, because after tonight looking away will no longer be possible. 17 miles from Charlottesville, wrapped in fog and hypocrisy, Covington Manor awaited its new arrival. The bearded slave woman whose body would soon challenge the limits of nature and whose captivity would define the darkest experiment ever conducted on American soil. The spring of 1847 arrived cold and slow across the Virginia Piedmont. The air smelled of wet iron and decaying leaves, like something old being unearthed. On the rise overlooking 800 acres of tobacco and sorghum stood Covington Manor, its red brick facade glistening with dew, its white columns hiding a family already divided by silence. Inside, Dr. Edmund Covington stared out from his study window, the kind of man whose stillness felt more dangerous than movement. His eyes, grey, exacting, were not eyes of mercy, but of measurement. On the parlor piano, his middle daughter, Elizabeth, repeated a single scale until it became less music than hypnosis. Upstairs, Sarah read from a Latin medical text she didn't understand. The youngest, Margaret, helped the cook without speaking, her mind far from the smell of boiling lard and wood smoke. That morning, a covered wagon appeared on the long road, wheels groaning in mud. The doctor himself went out to meet it, unusual because he rarely greeted his own deliveries. From behind the thin curtain of the kitchen window, a house servant named My Dalton watched as he spoke to the driver, then extended a hand toward the wagon bed. When the figure stepped down, My's breath caught. A young woman, tall, dressed in a plain grey shift. But what froze her wasn't the dress, nor the pale skin that looked almost translucent under the overcast sky. It was the beard. Not shadow or stray hair, but a dark, undeniable beard running the length of her jaw. The master didn't recoil. He looked satisfied. He led the woman inside through a door the servants weren't supposed to see used. It shut behind them with the metallic click of a lock that didn't belong in a home. By sunset, rumors had begun to spread through the quarters. The woman's name was Jordan Tinsdale. She'd been sold from the Lynchburg auction for $340, a bargain, because no one else had wanted her. The paper described her as female, 19, unsuitable for normal labor of peculiar aspect. The doctor wrote in his journal that night, acquired today a living paradox, female form with masculine markers. Subject presents potential to resolve certain questions of hereditary transmission. He ended the entry with a single phrase underlined twice. The experiment begins. That night Jordan sat alone in the room they had given her. A narrow cell dressed up as a chamber. The air smelled faintly of alcohol and iron. A single oil lamp flickered against the brick, throwing her shadow long across the wall. There was a bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair, nothing else. The window was too small for a grown body to escape, too high to see the ground below. The lock on the outside clicked like punctuation to a sentence she hadn't agreed to read. She kept her hands folded in her lap, tracing the thin scars that ran along her wrists, mementos of owners past. Every place she had ever been sold, they had treated her like a question. Too female to work the fields, too strange to clean the master's table, too human to be animal, too other to be woman. Each new set of eyes searched her for answers. But tonight, for the first time, she understood that the man who had bought her wasn't searching for an answer. He believed he'd already found one. Below her, in his study, Dr. Covington was writing. The nib of his pen scratched with mechanical precision. Subject Jordan Tinsdale. Observation 1. Beard growth consistent. Voice and posture exhibit secondary male characteristics. Suspected internal variation possible. Verification required. He paused, then added a line that trembled at the edge of excitement. If confirmed, this specimen may represent the intermediate form I have long hypothesized. He did not write person. He did not write woman. He wrote specimen. For the first time in her life, Jordan had been placed in a room with a real bed, but sleep would not come. Through the walls she could hear the rhythm of footsteps pacing, the doctor's steady circuit from desk to cabinet, from curiosity to obsession. Each step said, "You are not yours anymore," she whispered to herself. Not a prayer, not even words, just sound, as if to remind her body that her voice still belonged to her. In the quarters beyond the fields, the enslaved people could feel the change in the air. They had no proof yet, but they knew the truth of dread. Something unnatural had entered the house, and nothing within its walls would leave untouched. At dawn, the house stirred early. A mist hung so thick over the fields it looked like the world itself had stopped breathing. My Dalton, the house servant, carried a basin of water up the east wing staircase, a place no one was supposed to go. She'd been ordered not to speak, not even to look directly at what she saw, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. It creeps in through fear's smallest cracks. Through the half-open door, I saw Jordan sitting on the edge of the bed, her wrists bound loosely in linen straps, not tight enough to restrain, just tight enough to remind her she could be. Dr. Covington stood near the lamp, its light trembling across his spectacles. He spoke softly, as though comforting a child. "You mustn't be frightened. I am not here to harm you. I am here to understand you." His voice carried the patience of a priest and the hunger of a butcher. He circled her slowly, studying the curve of her neck, the breadth of her shoulders, the strange mixture of features that refused to fit neatly into one word, man or woman. To him she was proof of a divine loophole. He touched her wrist. She flinched. His hand did not move away. He dictated aloud for his notes. Subject exhibits unusual calm when observed, though pulses of defiance remain visible. The beard is genuine, not disease. Voice lower than expected. I suspect duality at a biological level. Then came the sound that would never leave my Dalton's ears. The soft click of metal instruments placed on the tray. The doctor reached for a small scalpel, not to cut, but to measure. "Tell me," he said, "do you know why you were chosen?" Jordan didn't answer. Her eyes fixed on the window. "Because you're the bridge," he whispered. "The proof that God makes mistakes only so men can correct them." Outside, I dropped the basin. Water splashed across the floorboards. When she looked up, the doctor's eyes were already on her. "You'll tell no one," he said quietly. That afternoon, the east wing door was fitted with a new lock. And that night, the servants whispered a single word to one another. "Experiment." Before you continue to section 5, type in the comments, "I see what hides behind the glass." Say it once. That's how you keep the truth from following you into sleep. For 3 days, the eastern wing remained sealed. Meals were passed through the half door by silent hands, and the sound of the lock sliding back into place became part of the house's rhythm. Dr. Covington hardly left. The servants whispered that he slept in a chair beside his subject, his journal open across his knees. The rest of the family tried to pretend the wing didn't exist. Yet silence has a way of echoing louder than words. Elizabeth, the middle daughter, began to notice small changes. Her father's gloves stained a faint brown, the new padlock glinting under lamplight, the way her sisters avoided the eastern corridor as if the air itself hurt to breathe. On the fourth evening, while her father attended to a patient in town, Elizabeth's curiosity betrayed her. She stole the iron key from his desk drawer and slipped through the hall barefoot, candle trembling in her hand. The lock protested with a low groan before yielding. The smell struck her first, chemical and sour like rain on old blood. Papers covered the desk. On one page, drawn in precise ink lines, was the outline of a woman's body annotated with measurements. Beside it lay another drawing, the same body overlaid with masculine organs. Beneath, in her father's handwriting, convergence theory, proof in flesh. She backed away, her stomach tight. Then a faint sound stopped her. Breathing. In the far corner, half hidden by a curtain, someone sat on the floor. Elizabeth raised the candle. The woman lifted her head slowly, eyes adjusting to the light. Jordan. The candle shook in Elizabeth's hand. For a moment the two simply stared, one born into power, the other trapped beneath it. Then Jordan spoke, her voice low, cracked but steady. He says, "I'm both." Elizabeth dropped the candle, wax splattered the boards. She fled down the corridor, the echo of that sentence following her like a curse. That night, she burned the sketches she'd taken from the study, hoping to erase what she'd seen. But ashes don't forget. And in the east wing, Jordan whispered to the dark, "If he wants to see what I am, he will." By morning, the manor felt heavier, as if the house itself had learned to listen. Elizabeth couldn't meet her father's eyes at breakfast. She stirred her porridge until it turned cold, her mind replaying the whispered phrase, "He says I'm both." Dr. Covington, however, seemed almost serene. His movements were measured, deliberate, his tone polite enough to disguise the storm beneath. Only when the last spoon scraped against porcelain did he speak. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, "did you take something from my study last night?" The room went still. Sarah froze with her teacup halfway to her lips. Margaret stopped breathing altogether. "No, sir." Elizabeth managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, small, knowing. "Then perhaps," he said, rising from his chair, "the rats have learned to pick locks." He left the room without another word, but an hour later, the house reverberated with shouting. 2 servants had been dragged from the quarters, my Dalton among them. The doctor accused them of trespassing, though both swore they'd never gone near the east wing. My's hands trembled as she tried to explain, but Covington's calm had evaporated. "Lies have a scent," he hissed, "and I can smell it on you." He ordered them locked in the smokehouse until sundown. From the parlor, the daughters heard every word, every cry. That night, Elizabeth couldn't bear the guilt. She crept once more to the east corridor, but this time her father was waiting. "Curiosity," he said softly, stepping from the shadows, "as the beginning of understanding. I should be proud." His smile didn't reach his eyes. He placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her toward the locked door. "If you wish to see, my dear, then you will see." He opened the door. The smell of alcohol and blood filled her throat. Jordan sat upright, unbound now, her gaze cold and aware. The candlelight carved deep shadows across her face. "You see," Covington whispered, "this is the new Eve." Elizabeth turned toward him, voice trembling. "She's human. Humanity," he said, "is a construct of anatomy and perception. She is more than human. She is proof." In that moment, Jordan's eyes met Elizabeth's again, and this time they didn't plead. They promised. For days after that night, Elizabeth barely spoke. Her father believed silence meant obedience. But silence is never empty. It's where rebellion begins to take root. From the servants' quarters came whispers that Jordan no longer wept, no longer resisted the doctor's instruments. She answered him with the stillness of stone, watching, waiting, learning. The East Wing became her classroom, and Covington, without knowing, her teacher. Every question he asked out loud she memorized. Every vial, every incision, every note. She had begun to understand his science, and with it, his weakness. Elizabeth's guilt soon hardened into purpose. She began slipping food and scraps of cloth through the vent near the East Wing stairwell, careful never to be seen. Sometimes, in return, she'd find pieces of paper pushed back through the grate. Torn corners from the doctor's journal, words in his hand that chilled her. Duality observed in behavioral response. Subject alternates between feminine compliance and masculine aggression. The equilibrium must be broken to isolate the dominant nature. Then another line beneath it, scrawled later in darker ink, "Tomorrow, the separation begins." That single phrase kept Elizabeth awake all night. She didn't know what separation meant, only that it sounded final. At dawn, she went to the locked door and whispered, "Jordan." A faint voice answered from the other side. "He's going to cut the woman out of me." The words froze her where she stood. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Her father's stride, deliberate and unhurried. Elizabeth fled into the nearest linen closet, holding her breath as he passed. Inside the room, Covington spoke softly, almost lovingly. "Don't be afraid. You were chosen for this. You are the bridge between two worlds." Then came the scrape of metal against wood, the steady rhythm of preparation. And then, Jordan's voice, calm but cold. "And you're the man who thinks he can play God." The crash that followed rattled the corridor. The sound of glass, a table overturning, a cry of pain. When Elizabeth emerged, her father was gone. The door to the east wing stood wide open, the lock twisted from the inside. Jordan was no longer there. The morning Jordan escaped, the fog didn't lift. It thickened, swallowing the fields and the tree line beyond. To the servants, it felt as if the sky itself was hiding her, protecting her from the man who had tried to unmake her. By noon, Covington had roused every man on the property. Dogs were brought from the neighboring plantation, their barks echoing through the hollows like church bells for the damned. He stalked the porch, pistol in hand, still in his blood-stained waistcoat, shouting orders that blurred between rage and desperation. "She's dangerous," he kept saying. "Not just to me, to nature itself." To Elizabeth watched from the parlor window, her stomach knotted. She wanted to believe Jordan had reached the woods, maybe the river, but a voice deep inside her whispered that Jordan was still close. That night, thunder rolled in. The servants were forbidden to sleep. Lanterns burned in every window. Covington paced the halls, muttering scripture warped into science, science warped into madness. "The line must be purified," he repeated. "The blood must answer." Then, just past midnight, a sound from the east wing. A door closing softly. Elizabeth froze. Slowly she crept toward it, the candle trembling in her grip. The hall smelled faintly of rain and smoke. When she reached the doorway, she saw the impossible. Jordan stood there, soaked, barefoot, and calm. The beard that had once made her an object of ridicule now framed a face filled with terrible grace. Her eyes gleamed with purpose, not fear. "He can't end what he doesn't understand," she said softly. "But I can." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "He'll kill you," she whispered. Jordan shook her head. "He already tried." She stepped past her, silent as breath, moving toward the study below, the same place where every diagram, every note, every piece of her suffering had been catalogued. Elizabeth hesitated, then followed. They found Covington at his desk, candlelight trembling across his face. When he looked up and saw Jordan standing there, alive, unbroken, something inside him faltered. "You're an abomination," he hissed. Jordan took another step forward. "No," she said. "I'm the proof you prayed for." The thunder outside cracked like the sky splitting open. For a long moment no one moved. The thunder rolled again, closer now, shaking the windows in their frames. Jordan stood in the center of the room, the candlelight trembling against her wet skin. Every inch of her bore the mark of what Covington had done. The faint lines on her wrists, the cuts, the bruises. But her eyes were clear, steady, defiant. "Dr." Covington rose slowly from his chair. His pistol lay on the desk beside the open journal. He didn't reach for it, not yet. His voice was low, trembling on the edge of awe and terror. "You should not exist," he whispered. "You are an error in creation, a contradiction that mocks both God and man." Jordan tilted her head, almost curious. "Then why are you afraid of me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Covington's hand twitched toward the gun, but before he could move, Elizabeth stepped between them. Her voice broke. "Father, stop. She's not what you think she is. None of this was meant to be." He turned on her, eyes burning. "You know nothing of what is meant." "I gave this family purpose. I brought science into the service of the divine. She was to be our proof that the soul obeys anatomy. Jordan's voice cut through his madness. "And what did you find, Doctor? Did the soul stay where you told it to?" Covington hesitated, just long enough for Jordan to step closer. The air between them tightened. Then, quietly, she placed one hand over his chest, right above the heart that had caged her for months. "You wanted to see what I was?" she whispered. "No, you will." The pistol fired once, the sound swallowed by thunder. When the smoke cleared, Covington was on the floor. The journal lay open beside him, a spreading stain darkening the word proof. Jordan stood over him, eyes unblinking, breath steady. Elizabeth fell to her knees, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. "What have you done?" she whispered. Jordan looked down at her. "I've ended his experiment." Outside, the rain began to fall, slow cleansing relentless. By dawn, the storm had broken, leaving the manor wrapped in silence so deep it seemed to hum. Rainwater crept beneath the front door, carrying the red smear of the night's violence into the grain of the old oak floors. No one spoke, not the servants who found the body, not the daughters who stood in their nightgowns at the top of the stairs, watching the doctor's lifeless form carried away under a sheet that could not hide the stain beneath. Elizabeth could still smell the gunpowder on her hands, though she hadn't pulled the trigger. It clung to her skin like memory. Beside her, Sarah wept softly, and Margaret just stared, her face blank and hollow, as though she'd seen death step out of a book and sit at their table. Jordan was gone. No one saw her leave. The back door hung open, swinging on its hinges. Muddy footprints led down the steps, then vanished into the wet grass beyond the orchard. Some said she ran toward the river. Others swore they saw her walking straight into the fog, barefoot, her head held high. The sheriff came that afternoon. The family told him what they had rehearsed, that the doctor had taken his own life after months of fever and delusion. The servants nodded through their fear. The sheriff looked at them all, his eyes too tired to care, and signed the death report without asking questions. That night, Elizabeth burned her father's journals one page at a time in the parlor fireplace. The ink bled into flame and turned to ash, but the words refused to die. Even as she watched them crumble, she could still see them written behind her eyes. Proof in flesh. The new Eve. When the last page was gone, she whispered into the fire, "He was wrong. You were never a mistake." And outside, the wind shifted, and for a moment she thought she heard footsteps in the grass. Soft, deliberate, moving away from the house. The east wing was sealed after that, boards nailed across the door, locks forged without keys. But on quiet nights, long after the servants had gone to bed, the Covington sisters swore they could still hear it. The sound of breathing behind the wall. Years passed, but the east wing never stopped whispering. The boards warped and grayed with time, yet beneath them came faint sounds. A creak, a sigh, a shuffle in the dark, as if the room remembered what had been done inside it. After their father's death, the Covington sisters became the silent women of Albemarle County. They inherited the manor but never married, never entertained guests, never spoke his name aloud. Some said guilt bound them. Others said fear. Elizabeth, the eldest, took to wearing her father's old coat when she walked the fields, the pocket still lined with ash from his burned journals. Sarah taught the children of freed families to read in the smokehouse, the same place her father had once used for punishment. And Margaret, the youngest, was seen most often at the riverbank, sketching faces in the mud that the water always carried away. Every spring, they hired new workers to tend the crops. None ever stayed beyond a season. They complained of doors unlocking themselves, of footsteps pacing when the house was empty, of a woman's voice humming deep within the east wing. One boy swore he saw her in the reflection of the upstairs window, a tall, bearded figure standing behind Elizabeth as she sewed by lamplight. In 1863, a traveling preacher stopped by Covington Manor to offer a blessing. He left before sundown, pale and trembling. He said the walls spoke scripture backward. He said a woman's voice asked him a question he couldn't answer. "If I was made by both, who made you?" That summer, Elizabeth sealed the east wing entirely, ordering it bricked over from floor to ceiling. The workers did not ask why, and she did not tell. When she died years later, the will was simple: the manor to be left untouched, the east wing never to be opened, and a note, written in her own hand, folded between the pages of a hymn book, She was not a monster. She was the price of one man's hunger for proof. The manor was abandoned by the century's end, but locals still say that when the fog rolls low across the fields, you can see her walking the ridge, barefoot, bearded, and free. By 1902, Covington Manor was nothing more than a sagging relic swallowed by vines. The roof had caved in on one side, the porch steps were rotted through, and the orchard had turned wild, branches twisting into each other like a tangle of memories refusing to die. It was a government assessor named Henry Bell who first set foot there again. The county had ordered a survey of the old property, and Bell, young and curious, ignored the locals' warnings about the house that breathes. He arrived on a cold November morning, notebook in hand, the air thick with the smell of damp cedar and something else, old iron maybe. Inside, the manor was a museum of neglect. Dust blanketed everything. Mice had made nests in what was once a piano, the wallpaper peeled in strips like skin. But what caught Bell's eye was the east corridor, where the plaster ended abruptly against a crude wall of brick. Someone long ago had sealed it completely. By lamplight, he traced the surface with his fingers. It wasn't part of the house's original design. The bricks were newer, clumsier, as though laid in a hurry. And at the center, faint under a century of soot, he found something carved, 3 letters. JT. He came back 2 days later with 2 laborers and a crowbar. It took hours to loosen the first stone. Behind it came a rush of air so cold and stale it seemed to whisper out of the dark. The men coughed, but Bell pressed forward, brick after brick, until the opening was wide enough to step through. His lantern beam fell on what had once been a room. Walls lined with shelves, a rusted bed frame, the skeleton of a chair, everything coated in a grey film of dust. Then he saw it, a shape on the far wall still nailed there after all those years. A piece of canvas stretched between 2 beams, covered in faded ink, a human figure drawn with eerie precision, half male, half female, the features almost divine. And beneath it, written in looping script, the proof of the bridge. Bell stumbled backward, lantern trembling in his hand. The air felt alive now, humming, vibrating, almost breathing. Then, faint but clear, from somewhere deeper in the dark came a woman's voice. I finally looked away. When Henry Bell's horse was found tied to the gate 2 days later, the reins slick with dew and the saddlebag untouched, no one thought much of it. But when the county clerk went looking for him, the manor door still stood open, the lantern still burning inside, and Henry Bell was gone. The men who went in after him swore the air was wrong, not cold, thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were breathing in and out. They found his notebook near the brick doorway, the last page scrawled in a shaking hand. The figure is not a painting. The eyes moved. They never found his body. The county sealed the manor again, citing unsafe conditions. Though everyone in town knew it wasn't the structure they feared, from then on, the place was cursed ground. Children dared each other to run to the gate and touch the rusted latch before sundown. Hunters avoided the woods, claiming they could hear humming when the fog rolled in. In 1911, a drifter passing through Albemarle claimed to have spent a night in the Covington ruins. He told the sheriff he heard footsteps pacing above him all night long, even though the second floor had collapsed decades earlier. Before he left town, he carved 3 words into the back of a tavern table. She still sings. Through the 1920s and 30s, historians came, men with cameras and curiosity. But none stayed past dusk. One of them, a professor from Richmond, recorded a phonograph cylinder in 1932 before abandoning the project. When played back, it captured faint breathing, followed by a whisper, "You burned the wrong book." Locals say the Covington sisters' graves were found years later behind the chapel, their headstones arranged in a crescent. No one knows who placed them there. No dates, no epitaph, just one word carved across all 3 stones, witness. By 1954, the county burned what remained of the manor. Yet on still nights, travelers claim they can see light through the fog where the east wing once stood. A soft orange glow that pulses, as if from a lantern swinging gently in an unseen hand. The modern rediscovery of the Covington archive began in 1978, when the estate's last heir, a recluse named Arthur Pennington, donated several boxes of medical curiosities to the University of Virginia. Among the anatomical sketches and preserved specimens was a sealed crate labeled simply E.W. Covington, Private Research. It remained unopened for nearly a decade, dismissed as irrelevant to contemporary science. Then, in 1987, a graduate student named Louise Brenner cracked the lid. Inside she found 4 bound volumes wrapped in oilcloth, brittle with age, their spines labeled Experiments of Reproductive Variance. The text was written in a cipher nearly identical to one used by Confederate code officers. But certain phrases stood out in plain English. Bridge material confirmed, subjects compliant, implantation successful. Brenner didn't understand what she was reading, not at first. The diagrams were too detailed, too deliberate, and too human. For months she worked in secret, fearing what would happen if her advisor saw. But by the spring of 1988, she had decoded nearly a third of the journals. What she uncovered didn't read like 19th century science. It read like confession. Dr. Covington had documented not only the births, but his belief that Jordan, the bearded woman, represented what he called the bridge between the seed and the bearer. He wrote that conception could be redirected, that generation itself could be transferred by deliberate will. Brenner published a short paper hinting at her findings. 3 weeks later, she vanished on her way home from the campus library. Her car was found abandoned near Route 29, engine still warm, headlights still burning. The crate and the decoded pages were missing. In 1992, fragments of those pages resurfaced in a private auction in Atlanta. A collector who purchased one described sketches that resembled both male and female forms joined at the spine. The item was withdrawn before public sale, its provenance disputed. And yet, the whispering continued. From archivists, from night guards, from cleaning staff, who said they heard humming in the storage vaults beneath the medical school. They said it sounded like a woman's voice, low, resonant, and wrong. In 2007, the university's Department of Historical Medicine began a digitization project of its older archives. Among the scanned materials were several unlabeled glass plate negatives found inside a cedar chest, their surfaces smudged with soot. Technicians initially assumed they were early surgical records, until the first image came into focus. It showed a small windowless room. In its center, a single iron table, and upon it, a form that appeared human, but not quite. The figure's torso was that of a woman, yet the arms and shoulders were visibly masculine. Most disturbing was the abdomen, an incision perfectly sutured, and within it a second shape, a face pressed against translucent skin, eyes half open. The project halted immediately. Only one file, mislabeled Bridge Test 03, escaped deletion, uploaded to a private backup server used by a student volunteer. When researchers traced the digital footprint, the account no longer existed. But the image circulated briefly on underground forums under the name The Proof of the Bridge. Some dismissed it as fabrication, but others noted that the photograph's chemical composition matched 19th century collodion formulas precisely. The negative had never been retouched. What truly unsettled analysts, however, was what appeared in the background: 3 silhouettes standing in the far corner, their outlines faint yet unmistakably human. Only one detail was clear. One of the figures wore what looked like a wide-brimmed hat, the same described in Dr. Covington's own portrait from 1849. Around the same time, campus security logs began recording unauthorized access to the sub-basement vaults between midnight and 3 a.m. each time, always when the air pressure sensors flickered. Guards complained of hearing what sounded like humming through metal ducts. When asked to describe it, one said, "It's not humming, it's breathing, slow and wet." By 2010, the university quietly suspended the archive's public access program, citing preservation needs. No official statement has ever acknowledged the recovered image. Yet to this day, if you visit the UVA Digital Archive and search E.W. Covington, you'll find a blank entry, no metadata, no attached files, only a date October 31st, 2007. And under File Author, one single name remains unaltered: Louise Brenner. In 2014, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Charlottesville Historical Society. It contained a flash drive, a photocopy of a single journal page, and a handwritten note that read, "You stopped too soon. The bridge still breathes." The flash drive held a single audio file titled Brenner Last. When archivists played it, they heard the faint hiss of an old tape machine. Then came a woman's voice, quiet, tremulous but composed. It was Louise Brenner. The date stamp matched 3 days before her disappearance in 1988. "If anyone finds this," she began, "understand that the journals weren't theoretical. Covington wasn't studying heredity. He was manufacturing it. He believed the human body could be rewritten, like language, the seed and the womb becoming interchangeable, so creation could no longer be traced. He said it would unite the divided form." Her breathing quickened, and a sound, faint, rhythmic, filled the background, something like liquid dripping onto glass. "I found the chamber beneath the east wing. The brick door still exists. It's smaller now, but it opens inward. There's something still inside, not bones, not tissue. It moves when light touches it. It hums, like breath caught in a jar." Then the recording cut off with a wet gasp, followed by the unmistakable sound of a second voice whispering directly into the microphone. "The proof is not in the body. The proof is in the bridge." Audio engineers verified the file's authenticity, no signs of editing, no digital tampering. The voice layers indicated that the second whisper came from within the same acoustic space, not superimposed. The accompanying photocopy matched Covington's journal handwriting precisely. It read, "Subject Jordan retained consciousness through replication cycle 5. She no longer requests release. She asks only for silence during the crossings." Forensic analysts noted that the ink contained traces of amniotic protein, a substance that couldn't have survived more than a century unless preserved in sealed organic conditions. By the time the FBI arrived to retrieve the materials, the flash drive was missing. The archivist who reported the discovery later resigned and left the state, citing persistent auditory phenomena. In the winter of 2020, a documentary team from Richmond obtained permission to film at the Covington site. What remained of it? Only the foundation stones still stood, half swallowed by the woods. They brought infrared cameras, ground-penetrating radar, and a single goal to locate the chamber Brenner described. The first 2 days were uneventful. Then, on the third night, one of the thermal sensors began picking up intermittent heat signatures beneath the soil, small pulsing ovals, each about the size of a human heart. The readings came in rhythmic bursts, as if responding to sound. When the team played back their environmental recordings, a low tone was audible. A single note sustained for 9 seconds, then silence. They continued digging until they struck brick, blackened and fused, the outline of what once was a doorway. Embedded within the mortar was an iron plate etched with a word barely legible beneath the rust, CONGRD, Latin for harmony. At 3:47 a.m., as they cleared the top layer, the lead cameraman reported hearing a humming echo through his headset, not feedback, but resonance, as if the air itself was vibrating. The on-site generator failed moments later. The footage from that minute onward is corrupted, the frame bleeds into orange light, and a blurred human figure appears, standing inside the sealed threshold. In the final 30 seconds of the surviving audio, someone, perhaps the sound engineer, can be heard shouting, "Who's in there?" Followed by a second voice, calm, almost melodic, "You came too early." The next morning, authorities found the camp abandoned. All that remained were the generator, 3 tripods, and the infrared tablet still recording. The last frame captured was a faint orange pulse rising and falling beneath the soil, timed precisely to a human heartbeat. 2 months later, the surviving members of the team released a short statement. "Wu retrieved proof of the bridge. We will not release it." When investigators attempted to locate them for follow-up interviews, each had disconnected their phones and moved out of state. One email sent from an untraceable domain arrived at the Historical Society. "It doesn't end in the ground, it ends in us." By 2022, fragments from the Covington excavation quietly reached the hands of independent researcher Dr. Naomi Ellis, a bioarchaeologist known for her work on degraded human tissue. One envelope, postmarked from an unlisted address in Virginia, contained a single preserved sample, a piece of fibrous material, pale and elastic, with no recognizable cellular structure. It came with only a note from the chamber, "Do not expose to light." Ellis, skeptical but curious, examined the sample under a controlled environment. Under normal microscopy, it appeared inert, an organic membrane, likely gelatinized collagen. But when exposed to near-infrared light, the tissue contracted on its own, as though reacting to attention. The movement repeated every 30 seconds, matching the frequency of a resting human pulse. Chemical analysis yielded impossible results. The sample contained both XX and XY chromosomal material interwoven, sharing identical mitochondrial DNA sequences. To Ellis, it was as though the donor had been both mother and father of the same lineage. A biological closed loop. She published a preliminary note under an alias, describing the find as a synthetic chimera of unknown 19th century origin. Within 48 hours the post was deleted and the research server hosting it went offline. Colleagues later reported that Ellis had withdrawn from all communication, her final message reading, "The pattern is recursive. The bridge is a cycle, not a person." Weeks later, a graduate student cataloging Ellis's notes found sketches of a circular diagram resembling a Mobius strip formed by two entwined human figures, one masculine, one feminine, their spines merging into a single curve. At its center, she had written, "Birth inverted, creation mirrored, witness the unmaker." Soon after, rural residents near the former Covington estate began reporting strange nocturnal sounds, harmonic vibrations, like distant voices singing beneath the earth. Livestock refused to approach the property's boundary, and equipment from surveyors malfunctioned whenever directed toward the site's coordinates. A week before she vanished, Dr. Ellis mailed her assistant an unmarked USB drive. Its only file was an audio loop of low-frequency humming, identical to that recorded by the 2020 documentary team. When spectrographic software analyzed the tone, the waveform formed distinct letters. They spelled one word: witness. On the night of October 31st, 2023, a local AM radio station in Charlottesville, WBR 1190, known for its late-night weather updates, experienced a 17-second broadcast interruption. What played instead was described by listeners as a deep hum followed by a woman's voice speaking in unbroken Latin. The Federal Communications Commission traced the anomaly to a transmitter relay less than 5 miles from the former Covington property. The original signal file, preserved in the FCC's interference logs, contained 3 distinct layers: a bass resonance at 13 Hz below human hearing, a harmonic overtone corresponding to female vocal timbre, and a third signal, encoded in binary. When translated, the binary produced the following line: "Bridge complete. The witness endures." Within hours, the anomaly spread online. Audio enthusiasts attempted to clean and loop the transmission, unaware that the signal itself carried an infrasound modulation, a frequency known to induce nausea, dizziness, and emotional disorientation. Several users reported vivid hallucinations while listening, describing visions of a figure, lit, singing without sound. The university publicly denied any connection to the Covington archive. Yet 1 week later, an internal email leaked from a faculty server confirmed that the frequency in question matched residual resonance patterns recorded in the medical school's basement vaults in 2007. The correspondence ended with a single line from a senior researcher: "If it's transmitting again, it means the cycle has found a carrier." That winter, a pale orange glow was reported once more at the ruins of the Covington Manor. Hunters described seeing a person standing in the mist, holding what looked like a lantern, their features shifting with every blink. A passing trucker captured dash cam footage showing the same glow bending toward the road, not away from it, as though the light itself were searching. The file was later analyzed frame by frame. The outline visible within the glow was not solid but mirrored, a perfect bilateral duplication that reflected itself even in motion. Experts concluded it was a light artifact. Locals knew better. They called it "The Bridge Returned." The radio anomaly has never repeated, but every Halloween since WQBR's frequency drops to static at exactly 3:47 a.m. The same minute the 2020 excavation footage went dark. In early 2024, a final fragment surfaced. A letter discovered in the private collection of the late Arthur Pennington, last heir to the Covington estate. It was sealed in an envelope stamped 1881 and addressed simply, "To whoever walks beyond my name." The handwriting was unmistakable: Dr. Elias W. Covington. "If this reaches eyes unbound by time, know that I did not seek God nor devil, but the space between. I have seen birth reversed, soul split, and soon again. I have heard the body sing when it should weep. The bridge is not made of flesh, it is made of memory. The womb remembers the seed. The seed remembers the womb. When they recognize each other, creation closes. Below his signature of small wax seal bore the impression of two mirrored faces, one male, one female, fused at the mouth. The letter was authenticated by carbon dating and trace residue analysis. Both confirmed it was genuine, unaltered since the late 19th century. But the most disturbing discovery was not the content. It was the paper itself. Under ultraviolet light, faint fibers pulsed, as though living tissue had been woven into the page. When Pennington's archivist turned the final leaf, she found one last handwritten line in a different ink, more modern, shaky. Possibly added decades later. He was right. It moves when you speak its name. That same night, surveillance footage from the storage wing recorded a power surge at 3:47 a.m. The same minute echoed throughout the case's history. The lights flared orange, then died. When power returned, the letter was gone. No forced entry, no alarms. Just a thin residue left on the table, fibrous, elastic, chromosomally indeterminate. Since then, the Covington property remains fenced off. The soil beneath it is sterile, yet geophones detect faint rhythmic pulses every 27 seconds, a sound halfway between a heartbeat and a voice. Locals say if you stand by the gate at midnight and whisper, "Bridge," the mist will part just enough for you to see a faint lantern glow. And if you listen closely, beneath the wind, you'll hear a woman humming, not from the earth, from below it, THEND, THEPROOFT, BARIG.